Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@usaprepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. You dial set correctly to USA Prepares. Thank you for being in class with us today. Jason is engineering the broadcast in Minnesota. Dr. Margaret is with us, and we're going to be talking about strokes. This is part 2. 866-582-9933, 866-582-9933 is the call-in number. Telephone listen line, 605-477-3249. Dr. Margaret, last time you were on with us, just a few days ago, you presented in a brilliant way what strokes are and what the family needs to know in order to give care to the stroke patient. Welcome, Dr. Margaret.
Welcome. Good morning to you. How are we doing today?
Well, wonderfully. And I wanted to say, I was thinking this morning as I was walking around the farmhouse that for those who have not experienced what we are going to be talking about and what we did talk about a few days ago, good for you. But if you, the odds are that you will get a chance to experience someone in your family having a stroke, and it is a game changer. It will turn your world upside down. And let me give you just a simple example of man and dog, or woman and dog. So, as class, as you know, we have an English Mastiff, very large dog, a little over 200 pounds. And I was in the kitchen, and I was working on a fluorescent fixture. I was wiring it for the farmhouse. And our dog came over and sat next to me. Right, and he does. He kind of sits next to me and leans because he wants contact. And so I was working on this fixture, and he's leaning on me, and that wasn't good enough for him. He then took his head and placed it under my arm and lifted my arm up. He was telling me he wanted attention now. And I said, I talked to him. I said, good boy, TJ. Thank you for coming over and helping me. And that wasn't good enough. He puts his paw on me, big, heavy paw. He wanted more attention. The attention I was giving him, talking to him and patting him on the head, that wasn't enough. And he was trying in his very best way to communicate with me that he needed something. It just happened to be attention that he needed. He wanted love and some hugs. And that is my analogy of what it must be like to be inside the body of a stroke patient who knows what's going on and is trying his or her best to get the message out. Is that accurate, or am I misrepresenting what it's like?
No, that's accurate. I'm going to do a couple of touches to what you said. First of all, aren't dogs wonderful conversationalists?
They sure are.
They're beautiful. I was thinking as you were saying it, now what if you had a little child who could not yet talk or express correctly and did those same physical behaviors? Would your response be the same or different? That's just one thought. What I want to say first is I was listening to you and Rick Miller talk about a variety of things yesterday, and you told that similar story about Thomas Jefferson. That's his name, right?
Yes.
Thomas,
TJ.
TJ the dog?
Yeah.
TJ.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
So you told that story, and then Rick confirmed what you were saying, and then I thought, well, there's an understanding, there's a concept, there's almost a rule when we study communication, and that is the receptive vocabulary is always greater than the expressive vocabulary. For example, we are talking about different issues today, and I'm using a vocabulary that's not really high, but it's not maybe common to some people who are listening, and I would bet they can understand more of what I say than they would be able to themselves then repeat. So we can know that people always have a larger, and animals, larger receptive vocabulary. They can understand more than they can actually use and express. Is that clear?
Oh, absolutely. Just listen to people try to explain things, and it comes out with, like.
Kind of, yeah, right. Yeah, you got it? Okay.
Right.
And so what that does for me in terms of dealing with stroke patients is one thing we should do is try to build up that patient's receptive vocabulary. They might not be able to use it to express, but first of all, at least to me, I need to understand before I talk. A lot of people don't need to understand, and they just go right ahead and talk. I've had friends like that. But me and learning a second language, if I don't understand, I'm not going to talk. Okay? So and you can do this in so many words, and I want to repeat what I said last time. A lot of this is like teaching a young child to learn to speak, and of course, speaking is accompanied by thinking. Okay, so today we're going to talk about some things that the caretakers can do in a very simple way, and I'm thinking of the caretakers being family members, those who live with the person, including the children. Some of the things I'm going to suggest, kids are delighted to do. They won't get bored doing it. An adult might, but they can do things with the patient who's trying to recover some capacities as well. Let me ask you this. Did anybody send in a question before we go farther?
Yes, and I have Joey in Michigan. He's a USA Prepares instructor. He's calling right now, and he had some questions. And so welcome, Joey. You're on with Dr. Margaret. We're talking about strokes.
Good morning, Vince. Good morning, Dr. Margaret.
Hi, Joey. How are you?
Good. I heard your show the other day, which was awesome. But other questions the questions I have, like the particular person I'm working with, they've lost not all their movement, but they've lost movement. Their muscles are more depleted. And how do you they communicate, their brain patterns well, but how do you get the movements moving, the muscles reacting, reconnecting with the brain-muscle barrier? And then phobias and fears a person has, like, wow, am I going to fall? Will this happen again? I mean, those are all questions that when you can communicate with a person, you can get this out of them, whereas you've taken it to the extreme. Man, I didn't even know you could get that bad, but I guess there are people 4 and 5 months in rehab that they can't speak. Some people never speak. So, I mean, very interesting. And the last question is, because I don't want to take from you. You've got an hour, and there's
Go right ahead.
But is there an electrical stimulation? Because I know they gave her a glove to put on but that didn't work for her hand. But her hand started working anyway a few days later. But is there any kind of electrical, whether you wear it on your earlobe, you attach to an outlet, whatever you do to get kind of like a TENS unit, but more optimum for stroke use?
You probably have to ask Dr. Shealy. I am not a medical doctor. I'm a doctor of philosophy, a PhD. I'm an academic doctor.
Okay.
Of course, the brain damage that occurs with a stroke can affect, and frequently does, muscles and muscle function. And when I'm speaking right now, I'm feeling the muscles in my mouth moving. And I'm feeling my lips making, they're doing work. The tongue has to move to a certain form, and the lips and the breathing has to go along. So certainly, muscle movement is involved in speech. It's also involved in nonverbal communication. But my bottom line right here is I am not a medical doctor. And I think what you're asking about in terms of physiological intervention is not what I do.
Here is my concern. What I listened to you say last week versus you said more in the hour. Norm will answer the question. I don't even like to say this, but I don't want to hear one word answer. Yep, no, no. That's not what I'm looking for. And you brought to life the detail of how tragic a stroke is, not just to the person, but to the family, the support around that person, because it's changed everybody's life. And it may be a change for the rest of all of everybody's life. But these other questions, if you don't feel right answering them, and you don't have to be accurate, just your opinion as to what would it take to get the mind and the muscle in sync. If just moving an arm back and forth, that movement creates thought. Those are the questions I have. And I'm not holding you to an answer, but right now I have no answer.
Okay, well, now you're making me remember when I was a child. And both of my parents were very athletic and in all sorts of sports. And but they moved us around a lot. Of course, you can't do this with a full-grown adult, but my father would hold us up in the air in one hand, and here we are up in the air just kind of floating and learning to keep our balance. They would lay down on their back and put their feet up in the air in their hands, and we would get on their feet, and they would lift us up, and we would maintain balance. So I'm thinking, touch and move the person. Now, it's, and which is just what I naturally do. I mean, if I'm with somebody and I know their arm is not really doing what we want it to do, well then, and this answer might have several parts to it, but basically I would take their arm and say, okay, now I'm going to put my hands on your arm. Now we're going to stretch it out all the way. Okay, I'm going to hold your arm there. You always tell the person what you're going to do before you do it. Okay, because they might not understand what you're doing, and that is a place where fear comes from, where people start touching you and doing stuff to you, and you really don't know what's happening. If you do that to me and I'm not aware, I'm going to resist. So always talk through what you're doing. So we could do extending the arm out. Okay, let's push our arms out in the air, or use a pillow, or put their foot against you and say, okay, now push out. Now pull
Dr. Margaret, hold that thought. Hold that thought. We're going into a break. Joe, please stay with us. Dr. Margaret's with us. She's in Spain. She's a PhD in many areas of speech, professor, instructor, seminar leader, and now radio instructor. She's a senior USA Prepares instructor. And Joey's with us, and we're talking about strokes, your family, and I'm going to call this do-it-yourself, because no one is going to have more love. No one is going to have more love for your family than you are. And Dr. Margaret, you mentioned telling the stroke patient what you're going to be do before you touch them, telling them what you're going to do. And Dr. Shuley, I've seen him do this. He's done it with me. He'll say, Vincent, may I take your hand? Here's what I'm going to do. Yes, please continue.
Okay, well, Joey, just try to tell me in a few other words exactly what the condition is of your patient. I get it that they have some physical mobility, muscle problems, but what's the communication level?
Oh, the communication's fine. The mental capacity's awesome. She actually gets around. She can actually walk without a cane, but she's using the cane just as preventative balance.
Correct.
As they said at the rehab, they said, you're very fortunate because in the last year, you're one of a few people that have recovered so well in such a short amount of time. But it's now not to allow any slack to occur and keep moving forward and keep everything moving and try to get the most gains. And, you know, there's so many different functions of a stroke where you can never talk again, you may never move again, but for this case, we're trying to take where we're already at and make it better. And a lot of it has to do with motivation, but a lot of it has to do with, I believe the patient has to want to increase as much as you want them to, or actually more, as I always say. I says, if you don't repair, nobody will care as much as you. And the fact that they agree with that, that's great. So the question is, yeah, there's physical therapy, and we're trying to learn from the therapist, because you only get so much time. As you said, you get 1 hour a week. Yeah, so right now we're getting 2 hours a week, but it's all making progress. But the physical part is what I'm more interested in than the vocal, and I don't want to take any more time because you already had a great idea. Okay.
Thank you. Let me interrupt you. Can the person feed him or herself alone?
Yeah.
So they have good control of the hands. There's no food spillage off the fork or anything like that. All of that motor part is good?
No, they actually went out and had lunch the other day.
Very good. And so then the chewing is fine and all that. And so it sounds like you said some motivational issues, which could be, of course, the same question I have almost every day of my life. Why? Why go on? You know, it depends on your perspective, but again, you know, it's a reasonable question. I'm wondering about this person's support group. I'm wondering if any of her interaction takes place among other stroke patients.
No.
Can this patient, because I used to do groups of stroke patients, and it's very nice to have other stroke patients around because all of them are different, but they understand and are sympathetic with each other's problems, and they can help each other. So we used to play something like, I don't know if it was poker or go fish or whatever, some simple card game. And if one could read but not speak, then the other one who couldn't read but spoke, they just took turns doing things for each other. So I'm thinking of some support system, and I think that's going to be incredibly difficult. What are the motor things you're concerned about? Is it really the concern about balance and falling again that's the issue? Do the legs walk fine? Is there any stumbling? Can they get up and down fine? But is the real fear about falling?
Well, the real fear is uncharted waters. Not ever being in this arena and not having anybody in an entire family, meaning external family, relatives, not ever being in a stroke environment is all new. But, yeah, some of it is the weakness of muscles is creating the little stumbling and the balance.
Dr. Margaret, Joey, hold that thought, please. We'll be right back going into another break. Joe, can you stay through the bottom of the hour?
I'll stay a little longer.
Sounds great. Thank you. Last, Dr. Margaret is with us in Spain. Joe is in Michigan, USA Prepares Instructor. David is on hold in Illinois, USA Prepares Instructor. And Dr. Margaret, you were talking about multiple times per week. Is that enough for Joe's stroke patient? Just having 2 hours or 1 hour twice a week. Is that enough, or does Joe need to supplement that?
My personal opinion is multiple times a day. I would suggest working sessions of possibly 5, 10, 15, 30 minutes, whatever the patient can tolerate, multiple times a day. To begin the day, in the middle of the day, at the end of the day. Twice a week, who can remember what they did before?
That's why
it's not enough. This is a joke. This is getting the body and mind and the whole person operating. Can't do that 2 hours a week. How many hours of TV do people watch a day now?
No, you're right.
How many hours of football game?
At the rehab, they were doing 4 hours a day, and then they would rest a day, and they needed that rest, and that's why the progress was made. And that was the big concern when you go back to, throw them on the side, we'll give you time, you'll lose that. But the problem is not knowing what's the proper exercise.
They don't tell you what the proper exercise is in the rehab?
I wasn't at the rehab. I wasn't privy to. Well, the person, the stroke.
Well, they need a companion. They can't be there alone. Somebody has to accompany.
Right.
What are you going to expect?
In the hospital, but now when we go to the next place, that's a few more days a week, and there's going to be, and I'm trying to sit in on those to see what they're doing. And they're really cautious about this because this isn't about a cure. Our medical system is a complete joke. Our medical system, the worst food, not the quantity, but the quality of the food that I've seen in that hospital, the only place the food could possibly be worse was at the elementary. Well, I had all schools, not just elementary. I mean, the food they fed them was food you'd never buy for yourself. That was great. And the medication is another thing, because the more medication you have, the more side effects you have, and then you need more medication to offset side effects. So I firsthand, between the court system for a traffic ticket, I seen how fumbled that is, and now the medical system. And granted, what they've achieved in the short 5 weeks is incredible, but they didn't only want a certain amount of, and you're not privy to this. I mean, somebody should make a video, how to train, how to move a stroke victim, at least this way. And it don't even have to be that. It's how we trained our family member, blah, blah, blah. So other people that don't know, what do you call them? A personal trainer? Not a personal trainer. A therapist.
They call them coaches, don't they?
What do they call them?
They call them a coach.
They call them like physical therapists, occupational therapists.
Those people should have videos out. So even a person, and I'm going to check YouTube. I never thought about that, but I'm going to just to see what it is they're doing for movement. Because you're right. When you have a baby, you move the leg back and forth. You move the arm up and down. That's given them motor sensory skills. You laugh, you smile, and that's because they're learning about cognitism. It's like when you have a dog. When you get a little dog, you can't expect it to know what a 5-year-old dog knows, because it's just like you go to a foreign country and you don't know the language. But I don't want to hog the time.
It's called training. It's called training. We have to train, and with your person, we have to retrain. I'm sorry to interrupt you. You're making me get sad and angry, okay, about the system. And, yes, what do we do? Let me interrupt here because I do have an idea that might be helpful. I'm very concerned about the person being unstable and feeling unbalanced. It happened to me with head injuries. It happened to me after a stroke. You just don't want to fall down again. Now, in my younger life and throughout my adult life, and it's not fun, I tell people who have any doubt about balance, I say, get a walker. What are you doing? And a cane is pretty awkward to handle unless you have 2 canes, which is, 2 sticks in your hand. That's not real easy either. I like having a walker around, in the house. That way you can do some of the training, walk the longer distances. If you're in a rehab center in a hospital, they'll have a treadmill to walk on and run, etc. But I would make sure to try to get to a point where the person feels more stable. I'm thinking the muscles. Now, let me say this. I was thinking this before. Balance is not only a thing of muscles. Balance has relationship to vision and the eyes. Balance is really extremely connected to the inner ear. It's called the cochlea and inner ear canals, and there can have been damage in there. And inner ear damage and balance problems are common in older folks. That inner ear tends to get a little bit out of order. It also could have been something to the back of the brain. Regardless of the cause, if we know they're concerned about their own balance and feel unstable, first of all, hold them by the arm when they walk, help them get up, even if they don't want to. But now I'm thinking, put bars on your hallway walls. I don't know if this person is going up and down steps. The bathtub should have those suction bars that are all around so that if the person feels unsteady, they can hold, or just to get in and out of the bathtub. But I'm doing ballet or Tai Chi exercise. You are on the wall, face the wall, you hold on to the bar, and then you do your leg bends, and you do your movements to the side, to the back, to the front, the other leg, to the side. Because it's about strength, but it's about, and what do you want to say?
Somebody's breaking up. But you mentioned something about, I know she did a Tai Chi, which she thought was good. Norm had actually his autogenic training, which is very good because that's getting your mind in control. Because you have to get to a place in your mind to tell yourself that you have taken this obstacle back and now you're in control of this. When you can do that, years ago I had a nervous breakdown. So for me, it took a long time, but I had nobody to ask. That's why I got to be so talented, because I had researched every possible scenario I could come up with. And everybody has a learning curve. Everybody gets kicked, and the harder you get kicked, the more you find out you don't want to be kicked, so you start to figure out how to protect yourself. And you start little by little, and you acclimate, and you float to a new level. But I don't want to take time, because I know David's on the phone. I appreciate what you've passed on. If you think about this, and Vince has you on a third time, because this is a growing, these are baby steps. We're all learning. I mean, this is an interesting topic, and nobody realizes a stroke or a brain injury, they're like one and the same, only different. Just one, you fell and hit your head. The other one, you have a trauma that occurred inside your body, and whether it was a rupture, whether it was a weeping, whether it was all of the above. And I guess her particular situation was in the stem, the brain stem. So that had, again, different effects. So they're all different.
And that's going to affect much more of the motor function as well. So I guess you've probably, if you've looked at online, the diagrams of the brain and the different lobes of the brain and what they each control. And when you say the brain stem, well, of course, that's lower. That's, lower in the head, and it's head, and right above that is the occipital lobe, which controls much of your vision. So I would, if you haven't done it before, do a little more, get into that. But I'm delighted to talk about it. I really appreciate you calling. Stay in touch. And this is the thing I want to say. If your person is so competent with communication, ask them what do they want to do. What are their goals?
We already know
what
the
do
goals.
They want?
Yeah,
she does?
Goals,
good.
Yeah, we already know the goals. We just need to figure out motor sensory, if there's an accelerated way to get to it. And norms, whatever I just said, autogenic training, that's a big part of it because it's reconvincing yourself. When I had anxiety and panic disorders, I didn't even want to go in a car. Yeah. Or if I had to crawl down the hall on my hands and knees to get to the bathroom because the room felt like it was caving in. I mean, and nobody knows where anybody else has been. Today I can look at that and think it was a joke. But there was a day and a time I felt like Bill Murray in Groundhog Day. And every day was, the alarm clock went off again. But anyway, I don't want to talk about that. I want to let you get on with David's call because he's only got 15 minutes and there's another commercial, so he'll barely get in.
I want to say this. Thank you. I'm interrupting you again. I'm going to repeat what I said before one time to Vincent. You have to be hard-headed. Okay, so it sounds like you're hard-headed or determined or tenacious, whatever word you'd like to use.
Yeah, that's really
it's tough and you got to get it on. You have to want it, and it's great to have support. Is there a group of aphasics? No. Can we set up one? Probably not physically. Can we do it through internet? That's my question that I'm going to be thinking about for a while.
That's a good.
Thank you so much for calling.
Thanks for your time. Thank you, Vince. Talk to you later.
You're welcome. You're welcome, Joe. Thank you. David in Illinois, welcome. You're on with Dr. Margaret in Spain.
How you doing? I don't believe you spoke about this yet. Maybe you were going to. Now, when I was in college studying strokes, our doctors said the easiest stroke to understand and see in front of you, but yet the hardest to treat, was the frontal lobe. And since it caused so much change in personality, a lot of families would have one of the family members suffer from a frontal lobe stroke, and they were so pleased that their personality changed, they would not report it. And therefore, a stroke, there was many cases we learned about this. And then, since they were untreated, a stroke would happen, another stroke would occur. Now would go into a loss of life. And that's something that people need to be aware of. If you have somebody that's in your life that has a pattern that they do all the time for 30 years, all of a sudden, bam, it's changed. They're totally different. That's a sign that could be a very clear sign of a frontal lobe stroke. And it's sad how they started researching this. They started researching it when all these parents were bringing these children in for frontal lobe lobotomy. And they realized how much that frontal lobe can control.
Frontal lobe what?
Lobotomies. I'm surprised you don't know about that.
I do know about it. Freaking me out.
All right, we'll be right back with...
okay.
We're going into a break, David. Dr. Margaret, David is also an instructor, and he was in the sights of John Wayne Gacy, the mass murderer, and David escaped. We'll be right back with both of you. We're talking about strokes, and David mentioned lobotomy in class. Just as a point of history, a woman was born about 100 years ago, and her name was Rosemary Kennedy. She was the sister of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, President of the United States, daughter of Joe Kennedy. And when she was 23 years old, Joe Kennedy, her father, had her lobotomized and changed her for the rest of her life into a toddler. At 23, she became a toddler because she was lobotomized. David, please continue.
I'll just say this about the stroke. Most of your strokes that you're dealing with that I've worked around, some of them did have motor functions. And our doctors that were teaching us said, always remember, it's the patient going through it, not the family. Try to encourage, because there may not be a quick fix, but they often transfer the issue to them like it's their inconvenience, because they don't understand that there's nothing wrong with the body. For example, this one individual, their whole left side of their body they would walk around like it was in an accident. And the parents could not understand why this child, it's a brain thing. All you got to do is think hard enough. No. You got to support.
Mm-hmm.
And encourage.
You're talking about the medieval period, right? I'm kidding. Yes. In fact, the film, I just heard a review on the radio, which is pretty terrorizing, because I don't know who's seen it that we're talking to right now, but it is about exactly that, and how children were often brought, children who might have been in services and were a little bit, problematic or whatever. Well, they'd stick a scalpel in there and just scramble up the frontal lobe. Okay? Then they'd send them up.
I'll get off here and let you talk.
Okay.
Okay, David. Thank you so much.
Nothing else?
No,
Okay,
no,
thank
you
you.
probably got other people. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Okay, David.
I'm glad you mentioned the thing about the sister of JFK, and yes, that did happen in recent times. And look at what people do to each other, and look how important little parts of the brain are. Now, that person can survive physically without the frontal lobe, but the frontal lobe is where the intellect, the thought processing, and the inhibitions are located. So, nothing to play with. It's been done systematically, historically, by practicing physicians. Okay? Do we argue with that? That's a rhetorical question. Go ahead, Vincent.
In 1941, Joe Kennedy, the father of Rosemary, scheduled her for an experimental procedure, and it was designed to make mentally ill patients more docile. So they drilled holes in both sides of her head, inserted a spatula into her cranium near the frontal lobes, and turned and scraped. And Rosemary Kennedy emerged from surgery almost completely disabled. And she was absolutely stunningly beautiful prior to the procedure. Absolutely. It did not have to happen. And as a result, the family hid her away for decades, not to be seen, because they messed up. Or Joe Kennedy did. And my understanding is Joe Kennedy did this without discussing it with his wife, the mother of Rosemary Kennedy, the third Kennedy to be born of that family. Absolutely horrific. And Dr. Margaret, as you were discussing the stroke with Joey, how important is immediate therapy? Meaning, if you have the stroke on day one, when should you get therapy? Can you wait a couple weeks, or do you need to start right now?
I don't like to wait. I'm very impatient. Of course, I'm also realistic, and I also know that rest and complete rest immediately is often necessary. That's why they frequently put people into a coma, induced, to give the brain some of the swelling, but to give the brain to do some of its natural healing. If that were me, I would make sure that there was a nice ambiance in the room. I would have some music playing, because music is another kind of language. It has patterns. I would want to be sure that it was bright and lighted, on and off. They also need darkness. It's like start gently. Just and maybe while they're in that condition, sit next to them for 2 hours holding their hand. Or singing a little song, or counting their fingers.
You're talking about interpersonal experiences rather than just sitting in front of a TV and say, here, just let the TV babysit.
And don't have
patient,
any
right?
television. If they want to have anything, it can be music or it can be radio, but no.
Hour number 2 of USA Prepares, just me for this hour, and I'll be talking about some tips from the book. And I just want to let you know that these are the things that we do here at the farm, things that I do, our family does. Don't do any of these things unless you have read and learned and understand what is entailed and the associated risks with what I'm going to be talking about. George in New Hampshire, welcome. You're on with me.
Vincent.
Hey.
I just wanted to weigh in quick, if I could.
Sure.
With JFK, and his father had a stroke, and about the lobotomization of his daughter. I think her name was Maureen, if I'm not mistaken.
It was Rosemary.
Rosemary, all right. And what's not too well known is that lobotomization was a new science at the time, quackery science. And they said, like you said, she was not only a very beautiful girl, she was a very simple girl, but a very sweet girl. And they said that Joseph Kennedy wanted his children to be overachievers. They had to be competitive. They had to have drive, ambition. And she basically was just a simple, sweet young woman. And they said that the Kennedys had a reputation, not undeserved, for being serial philanderers, cheating on their wives, and very promiscuous. But when it came to someone like Rosemary, if she was at a dance and a young man asked her to dance, they would get in the middle of it and prevent her from going out on the dance floor. And over time, after a while, the sweet girl got to be bitter because she was forced to basically be like a wallflower, not even to be able to participate in her own life. Well, they said that Joseph Kennedy didn't discuss with his wife or anyone to have his daughter lobotomized. And there's a letter that I saw that she wrote to her father saying how she really wanted to please him and she really wishes that she could live up to it. But it was just from a daughter to a father who you could see was trying the best she could. Well, they said for the next 40 years after she was turned into basically a mental vegetable, she did not get a visit from any of the family. Some of it, I've heard that her mother was not even told where she was and what had been done. Now, my uncle had a friend who was an Irish housemaid there. There were a number of housemates there. And they said right around the time that Kennedy had gotten elected to the presidency, his father was there. He had a stroke. So they went running to Mrs. Kennedy. I believe it was on a Sunday. They went running to Mrs. Kennedy and said, Mrs. Kennedy, Mr. Kennedy, he's very ill. She was going out for her golf lesson. And I think this is where the score was even for all those years of I can only imagine the mental suffering on Mrs. Kennedy and not knowing where her daughter was. She says, I'm going out for my golf lesson. I'll be back. She came back later that afternoon, some hours later. Then she made the phone call for the ambulance. And like my uncle told me, he says, if I don't care how rich you are or anything else, if they can get to you within an hour, hour and a half afterwards to a couple hours, he goes, but if it goes much beyond a certain time, like your guest said, in other words, you'll end up basically in a wheelchair. And he ended up in a wheelchair. I don't even think he was able to speak. And, let's just say the ramifications were far-reaching. But from all accounts, Vincent, he was not a nice man. And I'm going to leave this with this. I don't mean to go on and on, but I just think it's important. If you really want to see certain things about what went on, like between Sinatra and the Kennedys, for example, there's a book by George Jacobs, Jacobs, and he was the butler. He served a number of functions. Well, anyway, he wrote the book Mr. S., and he said that he was at one of the dinners that Frank Sinatra had when Joseph Kennedy Sr. came in. And he says Joseph Kennedy was so abusive to the staff, who were made up of Native Americans and black people, and they said he said a joke, which he thought was hilarious, but George Jacobs, they said Sinatra was horrified, but for the sake of Jack Kennedy, who he felt a friendship and loyalty to, he kind of took it. But Joseph Kennedy said this joke. Now, this is his words. He says, what's the difference between a pizza and a Jew? And his punchline was, the pizza doesn't scream when it goes in the oven.
And these are the words of Joseph Kennedy?
This is what George Jacob witnessed at that small dinner. They said Joseph Kennedy was so abusive, he thought he was funny, and he also had an affair with many women, but Gloria Swanson was one of his more famous ones, and she was the famous actress in Hollywood over the years, and he brought her to Sunday dinner right in front of his wife, even though it was known that he was carrying on this affair. Now, you and I are kindred spirits in a lot of ways, but, you keep your word, you're loyal to your spouses for any number of reasons, not only for their love for them, but also self-respect and for your Creator. But what I'm saying, he was such a philanderer, but to bring her right to Sunday dinner, it was like, to me, it's like this man, and remember, he backed the Nazis too. They had to recall him from an ambassadorship. Roosevelt had to go because they said that he was so pro-German that, in other words, it got to the point, now he was Irish, and I understand having some of that blood in me, that, it was the Irish, for the most part, let's just say they have a long history with the English. And let's just say that he really wanted to see the Germans do a job on England. And without getting into it much beyond, I'm saying there's decent English people, but let's just say a lot of that government over there, let's just say they're predatory and parasitic, in my opinion, on their own people.
Yeah,
and I know
Joseph Kennedy, as you said, he was really not a nice person. And there are reports in the news and the internet that say that he and Frank Costello, the mob boss, were bootlegging partners. And there's a lot of information available about how Joseph P. Kennedy, was a bootlegger. He was involved in manipulating people to get his children, his boys, into the political arena. He did all kinds of shenanigans behind the scenes to get John Fitzgerald Kennedy, elected president of the United States. So yeah, he's done a lot of things that a lot of people would say were very suspect and questionable. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and I'll also say, Vincent, that he was very tight in with the Hearst family. I think he helped them out at a crucial time, so they owed him big time. So a lot of things were kept out of the newspaper. The Hearst family controlled probably one of the biggest syndicated newspapers and media outlets back years ago in the middle part of the 20th century, even latter. And Joseph Kennedy basically was Capone with a shoe shine and maybe a little better quality suit. And they said he was a contemporary of Al Capone, and they said that in Chicago, Sam Giancana was Al Capone's chauffeur. So when Al Capone died and was removed from his power, Sam Giancana knew all the contacts, and he became the bigwig there for a long time. And they said he was instrumental in pulling favors with the Chicago mobsters to swing the votes in Illinois that gave Kennedy the election. And they said Richard Nixon said they said it was so close, and there was some question about certain things that they asked Richard Nixon, would you like a recount in the 1960 presidential election? And Nixon said, to his credit, I'm not saying he was a saint, but to his credit, he says, I have too much respect for the country to ask for a recount. That's a quote. So, like I said, I think John Kennedy was destined to be president because I believe that he did prevent World War III. Because I think in 1962, we would have had an atomic exchange between the Russians and us. We may have come out the winners, but in that type of a conflict, I really don't think there are too many winners, if any.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Joseph P. Kennedy, JFK's father, he made some money, a lot of money, through insider trading and stock manipulation. Now, class, stock manipulation is the kind of thing where the little people get hurt. So you make money at other people's losses. And that's what Joseph P. Kennedy had been accused of doing. He was called a master of the stock pool. And it was a stunt that where a few traders would conspire to inflate stock prices, then selling out just before the bubble burst. That's the kind of thing that the Kennedy head of household, Joseph B. Kennedy, was involved in, according to what I have read. So he was just as George said, he was not a nice person. And of course, there's the illegal booze trade and the links to the mafia and the mob. Yeah, that's what, and ultimately got his son elected president.
Well, they believe the Great Depression was caused. He was one of the instrumental factors, where he was probably the George Soros of his time in a way. They said with the stock manipulation, I think they pulled some things, they said, just before and they believed that they were instrumental. He was among this consortium of very wealthy men who, and very, what's the word, in my opinion, unscrupulous men who pulled some deals, did something to the market, and they claimed that to a large degree they were instrumental in collapsing the economy in the late 20s, which resulted in the Great Depression.
Yeah, he and J.P. Morgan and some others, yes. Yep.
May I say something else, Vincent?
Sure,
I know,
sure.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I was going to send you this information, but I think it's better that perhaps I tell you this. It's a bombshell. Now, you know, a diplomat, when they come to the United States, do you realize, you know that they're pretty much exempt from our laws to a very, very extreme degree. Mm-hmm. Correct?
Yes.
I'm sure you're familiar with that, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, now, do you want me to wait until over?
Sure.
Okay.
Hold that thought, and let us know about this bombshell with diplomats arriving in the United States. George is with us. He's a USA Prepares instructor, and he's calling in from New Hampshire. We'll be right back. George has joined me for this broadcast, and we're talking about diplomats. George, please continue.
All right. Diplomats and their consulates are considered foreign territory within the United States. And while they're traveling around the United States, they are not subject to our laws. Now, so if there was a traffic infraction, if there was any kind of situation that might arise, even up to and including possibly murder, about the only thing that can be done is that they can be asked to leave the country. Now, I'm not suggesting that diplomats in general are going to do this, but you get bad apples in any group. But now, there's something called a Treaty of Peace 2020. Now, an award has been made, and it came through the West Virginia, where a group of men, the gentleman is Phil Udok, and that's Phil, and the last name is H as in Harry, Udok, Hudok. Now, they went all the way through the process of going all the way up the chain. They went within the system. They even took it as high as the Supreme Court in their state and beyond. And then they served President Trump, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and various and sundry heads of the state. And what they did was, when they failed to respond, the head administrators, they went to arbitration and they won an award. And this award is for every single American who's listening now, Vincent, and yourself, and myself. And what it is that now they're in the process of negotiating for total release, full liberty within the United States. So in effect, we will be like the diplomats. Now, it's got far-reaching ramifications, and they said that it'll have an impact on every patriot who decides to opt in. And there is an opt-in provision where anyone can attach their name to this. Now, if they go to philudok.info, look it up. You can follow it through. There are 2 pages that can be signed, downloaded, and signed, and sent to Mr. Udock. And then there's more to the procedure. But what I'm saying is they can find out that this is something that the opt-in for this is the government failed to respond because they were informed that they are acting beyond the purview of the law and the Constitution. And they said this can release people. Now, again, you know how we're dealing with very slippery types, but they went within the system, and not to go on, and I'll just say they went through all the steps. And when someone does not respond, it's considered by tacit approval that they're in agreement with it. Whether they are or not, at least in legal terms, they are in agreement by not answering. And we know how that has affected many of us in our lives in different ways. So this is something, if you look into, Vincent, I'll send it along to you, what I have so far. But what I'm saying is that Bill Udock, they have films and explanations where he goes into it. And what I'm saying, the opt-in will be up to December 21st, and then come January, they're then going into Washington, and they're basically saying, all right now, and it will not be unlike a treaty that the Native American tribes had with the government, where today they have their own laws within their reservations. Only with us, would even possibly affect even paying taxes on our houses. We won't have to pay them anymore because they'll be free and clear hours, which is the founders of the country wanted to. But they went through their own system to accomplish this. They took all the steps, and they have affidavits and everything else. So this is unique, and I'm just saying, I'm praying to God that that this. There's no reason why it should. 90% of it shouldn't work, Vincent.
Yes, and I found it. I found it, and the website is hudoc.info. HUDOK.info. HUDOK.info. Hey, George, thanks so much for being with us.
And if you want him as a guest, Vincent, yep, I can arrange it. All right.
Okay, make it happen, please.
Okay, we'll
make
do.
It happen.
Thanks, Vincent.
Next Friday. It's just me, and I'm going to be talking about some tips, the way we do things here at the farm. My experiences, things that work and work better than other ways. So I wanted to share with you, before we get started, I recommend that you watch the series Chernobyl. And it's a 5-part series, a mini-series. It just came out last year, or this year. And it's available for about $20 used and new on eBay. And it's called Chernobyl. When you watch this will alter your world. You will be concerned about the products that you buy. You'll wonder where they came from. You'll wonder how much, if any, radiation or radioactivity is in those products. What is contained in those products? This is going to be a gut-wrenching series to watch. I was only able to watch one at a time. I could not watch serially this series. I could only watch one hour at a time. So it's about 5 one-hour parts. I suggest you seriously consider watching it. Of course, The Walking Dead, Jericho, and Survivors, the 1970s version of Survivors. If you want to survive, you need to watch all of them, in my opinion. Okay. So I wanted to talk about ultrasonics. Back in World War II, and even after World War II, and even before World War II, hypodermic needles were ground glass instruments with a very sharp needle. The needles were reusable. The ground glass plunger and cylinder were reusable, and they were sterilized in between uses. The problem is that sometimes plasma would plug them up. these little tiny holes in these hypodermic needles were really hard to clean. So if you had a needle that was plugged up, it was very difficult to clean it. You'd have to have something smaller in diameter to clean out the plug. So ultrasonics were used. Now, what is ultrasonic? Well, it's a high frequency vibration, typically somewhere around 20 to 40,000 cycles per second. What we have is like a bowl, if you will, usually made out of stainless steel. There are transducers at the bottom of it that vibrate at varying frequencies from 20 to 40,000 cycles per second, or 20 to 40 kilohertz. And you add a solvent. The solvent can be water. It can be water with dishwasher detergent. And the water is usually heated. And then you just put these devices in there. And the vibration of the water will blast clean the items you put in there. So in my case, it's like carburetors. I'll take a carburetor apart. I'll take out the needle, the seat. You do not want to put anything in there that is not impervious to liquids. Okay? So you don't want to put cork in there. You don't want to put composite floats from a carburetor in there. But if you have a brass float, that's fine. And what I do is there's a basket that keeps the parts that you want to clean above the floor of the pot, if you will. And mine has a heater. I can adjust the temperature. And it has a mechanical timer. Some have electronic computer timers. I didn't want one of those. Mine, by the way, is a Crest brand, C-R-E-S-T. So I can take the carburetor apart, put it in there, and it can be really grungy looking. Warm up the water, set it for 15 minutes, and by the time this thing is done vibrating, bzzz, like that, those parts look brand new. It literally blasts the grease, the grime, the plugs in the small cavities and passages of the carburetor, blast them clean. It's not the kind of thing you're going to want to use every day, because you probably don't have uses for it every day. But I wanted to let you know that there is such a device. Now, what can you use it for? Well, you can use it for surgical instruments and tools and coins and fishing reels and fuel injectors, firearms, pretty much anything that you want to clean that you just can't clean because the surface area is too small to clean. I bought some, I wanted to get some matching flatware. I'm talking about stainless steel flatware. And I believed that it wasn't available to buy new. And by the way, flatware's gone up and up and up for, quality flatware. So we've had ours for 40 years or so. And I wanted to buy some that matched. Oneida brand. And I found some on the internet, used, eBay. And I wanted to absolutely make sure they were sterilized and cleaned. So, of course, you think, well, I'll just put them in the dishwasher and that'll do it. Well, I wasn't satisfied with that. So the forks and the spoons and the soup spoons, teaspoons, not the knives. I'll tell you why in just a second. I put them in this ultrasonic cleaner with some dishwasher detergent. I set it to warm the water. 15 minutes later, they came out looking newer than the existing flatware that we had. That's been through the dishwasher like every day. So I decided to put all of it through, except the knives. And the reason for not the knives is knives are usually a handle, the blade, and then there is a kind of a ceramic substance to glue the handle to the blade. And I didn't want to blast that apart in the ultrasonic cleaner. Now if you can somehow manage to suspend the blade so that the handle doesn't get immersed in the warm water, you'll probably be fine. So those are my thoughts about ultrasonic cleaners. And I really like having one around. And you may want to consider that too. So you probably don't want to use flammable liquids in it. So I just use water. And some people even put coins in there. But there is this thought that if you clean a coin, it's worth less than if you don't clean it. So I just want to let you know about that. Okay. Around Thanksgiving, we like everybody else, we have a turkey or Christmas. And Mrs. Finelli will prepare a turkey. And there's always more turkey than there is the ability to eat the turkey. So what do you do with the leftover turkey? Well, we have it all sliced up and we put it in the freezer naturally in BPA-free freezer bags or containers that are designed to store foods in the freezer, like the Rubbermaid style. Actually, ours are Rubbermaid. By the way, Rubbermaid got a lot thinner recently than it was many years ago before Walmart took care of almost killing Rubbermaid. You can look that up. So we take the Thanksgiving turkey leftovers, sliced turkey, and we'll put the white meat in these containers. And then later on, we'll want them. And what I do is I'll take a small Revereware frying pan, a small one, and I'll add some filtered water and a whole bunch, maybe half a teaspoon of red pepper, crushed red pepper. The seeds, the flakes. I'll put it on the stove, and I'll boil it in a saucepan for 5 minutes. And then I can make a sandwich with that. And it is absolutely delicious. Way better than you would expect. Probably as good or better than it was on Thanksgiving or Christmas. No kidding. You might want to try that. And I've experimented with adding garlic powder, not garlic salt powder, just garlic powder. Put that in the water, boil it for 5 minutes with the crushed red pepper flakes and seeds. And you may want to just drain off whatever comes off as a liquid and then use it for a sandwich. It's delicious. One of the things I wanted to mention is, what is a person's word worth? In my world, not much. Now, my word is, but people I've met, their word isn't worth the paper that it's not written on. And I kid you not. I'm going to give you some examples. So we were thinning out some of the vehicles around here, and we had a vehicle that we were going to sell for $1,000. And put it on the internet. And typically the vehicles of this type were selling for about $2,000 or $3,000. And we delineated the pros, the cons, pictures, inside, outside. We talked about the good, the bad. So if you read the post, the advertisement online, it was clear what this vehicle was. Got a few calls. People were coming. No show. How much is their word worth? 0. Now, when someone says that they're going to come to your house and they talk to you for a half hour on the phone and get clear details, and then they don't call and they don't show, it really frosts me because they wasted my time. Okay, so their word is worth not much. 0. Well, another guy called up and said he wanted to come see it. I talked to him at length, told him the good, the bad, everything. And we agreed on the phone of a price of $800. That's 20% off. It was a steal to begin with. And this person said that he wanted to show up, and I was on the radio for a half hour before he wanted to show up, but he wanted to show up. And I said, well, our son will be here, and he'll be able to show you, and if you want to take you for a drive, you can do that. And I'll be ready a half hour after you arrive. They went on a test drive. And before I was available, the buyer said to our son, well, I'll give you $700 and I'll put it on my trailer right now. My son said to him, you talked to my dad, right? Uh-huh. Yep. And did my dad tell you about the condition? Yeah. Uh-huh. Is it any different from what he said? Oh, no. No, it's exactly what he said. Exactly. My son said, okay, so you agreed on $800, right? Uh-huh. Yep. Well, it's $800 then, because that's what you agreed. And the guy indicated it, well, I was just trying to get another $100 off. Even though we agreed on the phone, even though we had an oral contract on the phone, he was willing to break his contract. How much is that guy's word worth? 0. Do I ever want to sell him another vehicle? No. We'll be right back. Class, most homeowners have these, and I think I'll tell you which one I think is the best. Many years ago, over 20 years ago, I looked at garden hoses. And the ones that are made with vinyl work great in the summer, but they'll crush and they'll crack and break when it gets cold. So why is that important? Most of us use garden hoses in the summer, right? Water the garden, wash the cars. Don't do that so much in the winter. However, there's another use for a garden hose that is critical, and that is for putting out fires. So if you have a home and there's a fire, would you not want to be able to start putting it out yourself? And what's the best thing to use to put that fire out? Well, you want to remove the heat. And fire needs an ignition. It needs heat. It needs fuel. And it needs oxygen. That's what it needs. So once it's ignited, you can remove the heat by applying water to it. So what's the best garden hose on the planet, in my opinion? Well, it's made by Craftsman. They're sold at Sears. And it is the black lifetime guarantee rubber commercial hose. It's the one with the lifetime guarantee. Now, is the lifetime guarantee going to mean much to you in the future regarding Sears? I don't think so. I don't think Sears is going to be around as long as Sears would like to be around. So I'm not betting on the lifetime guarantee part, but I can tell you for sure, based on my experience, that the black rubber commercial lifetime guaranteed 50-foot hose for $27 is the best you can get. So here's what we do. We have hydrants all over the farm, around the buildings, and even where cows are. And we keep these 50-foot hoses coiled up wherever there is a hydrant, even in the house. And the idea is you need to drain the hose. You can't have 1 ounce of water in the garden hose if you're going to use it to put out a fire in the winter, because that 1 ounce of water will find the lowest spot in the hose and it will block the water flow. So what we do when it's cold or cool, or it might be cold, we will drain that hose. We'll put it on a hill near the faucet and we'll drain it downhill and all the water will come out. Then we'll coil the hose in about a coil the size of, if you were to take your arms and make a circle with your arms like a hula hoop size, that's the size that we make the coil. And we start by raising the end of the hose up to our chest height. That forces any remaining water to go lower in the hose. And we pull the hose toward us. We are high in elevation, and the end of the far end of the hose is low. And as we pull it, more water comes out of the hose. And we drain it that way, and we coil it, and we leave it not attached to the hydrant. And we have a brass nozzle, about a 5-inch brass nozzle. Nelson makes them. You can get them for about $5 on eBay. And we have one for each garden hose. And we open the end of the nozzle so that if water enters it, it won't stay in it and cause the nozzle to burst. And I've made these little hangers, kind of out of fence wire, if you will, high-tensile fence wire, or almost high-tensile fence wire. And I make these loops, and I attach them to the building, and I put the garden hose nozzle there. Because what happens is they walk away. You move them, you go, I don't want to lose it in the grass, so I'll put it there. And it's hard to remember sometimes when other people move it and put it other places where they went. So I made these little loops, and I just put the hose right on the side of the building, next to the hydrant, next to the coiled hose. If there's an emergency, there's no water trapped to block the water pressure. I can put the hydrant on it. It has not burst because I leave it open, and I hang it right where the hydrant is. So that's my feeling about garden hoses. And they're 50 feet. You can buy them right now. They're $26.99. That's the lowest price in the country. You can have them shipped to you. Craftsman, black, lifetime, rubber, not vinyl, not composition, not hybrid, rubber commercial hose. And they're 50 feet for $27. So those are my thoughts on the garden hose and the nozzles. And if you have a basement, you might want to keep one in the basement with a nozzle near where you have a water faucet. So if you have to put out a fire in your basement, you can get right on it before the fire department shows up to put out the foundation. And that's what it's like around here. They're called foundation savers because the fire department, by the time they're done, that's all you have left. Okay. Next Friday, depending on whether we have our instructor about Phil Hudock talking about the Treaty of Peace 2020. If he's with us, great. Otherwise, I'll be talking about tips from the book. And I'd love to hear from you. If you like them, let me know. If you think I'm wasting your time and my time, let me know. Thank you very much. Class, above all, honesty and integrity. What happens next is up to you.